A lot of people who watched my Atheist Fundamentalist video or read the ebook completely missed the irony of me calling myself a fundamentalist. One of the points of that video, and it was subtle, so I'm going to be very forgiving on this, was that there really is nothing in any way frightening for atheist or even anti-theist to be fundamentalist about. As noted, atheist and anti-theist like myself don't have a book that requires us to accept on nothing more than faith ideas like genocide can be a good thing, or homosexuals really do deserve to die, or that unmarried woman down the street having sex with her live-in lover should be taken to the center of town and stoned to death. Even the claim that atheists like myself are dogmatically, in other words mindlessly, opposed to God and religion doesn't quite fit the bill. Obviously, I can't speak for every atheist or anti-theist, but my opposition to the God of Abraham is based not on faith or emotion or desire or being brainwashed in my early formative years as religion frequently is. It's based on evidence and or a lack thereof. As a person deeply committed to the primacy and superiority of evidence, I remain open to any and all evidence for God and or religion. And that fact alone makes it impossible for me to be the kind of fundamentalist we generally think of when using that most frightening of F words. This really is what separates people like me who base their lives and thinking on evidence from the religious who proudly base their lives and thinking on faith. And I can state this principle very simply. If I am wrong, I want to know. And if you can show me how and where I'm wrong, I will change my mind. That's how I became an atheist in the first place. The difference between us really is that simple. For instance, if you can show me evidence that millions of Jews lived as slaves in Egypt for hundreds of years, left and wandered for 40 years in the Sinai, I will think again about the Exodus story. Christians, if 3 or more of you can gather together and end world hunger by asking Jesus, who said he would give you anything you ask in such circumstances, I will absolutely reconsider Christianity. I'll also accept moving a mountain, uprooting trees, or raising people from the dead, as these are all things Jesus said believers with just the slightest bit of faith would be able to do. Mormons, if you can show me the millions of steel swords and tens of thousands of chariots that should have existed in ancient America, according to the Book of Mormon, I'll reconsider my absolute rejection of the prophet Joseph Smith. Just show me the evidence and I will change my mind. And what's more, I really do want to know if I'm wrong. This is the attitude that separated me from my fellow believers when I was a Mormon. Yes, I had the spiritual experiences galore, and I had the classic burning in the bosom, a testimony from the Spirit that Mormonism was true. But a big part of my belief in Mormonism was based on the fact that the church had presented me with a good deal of evidence, which they used to bolster the empirically testable claims of Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon. You live by the sword, you die by the sword. Having been raised in the church, it wasn't natural for me to question that evidence. But as I got older and I felt the need to examine it for myself, when I did, I concluded that the evidence led to the exact opposite of what I had come to believe, what I felt to be true. Of course, for the religious, this is the test of faith, the time when you find out how much faith you really have. Time to dig deep and double down. If something makes perfect sense to you and the evidence is clear in backing you up, you don't need faith, do you? And I guess if there really is a supernatural realm where reasoning and our need for things to make sense doesn't matter at all, perhaps faith might have been my best play. But the fact is, I really didn't know if this supernatural realm existed or not. The evidence was extremely thin, and I simply wasn't willing to hang my entire life on the say of a people who, in the brilliant words of Bill Maher, didn't know something as basic as where the sun went at night. And that really is the point. People of faith ask, will you trust God or trust in the arm of flesh? But the holy books of the Abrahamic faiths aren't a direct verbatim revelation from God. People wrote them, fallible people, made of the same flesh and blood as you and I. So the question is, will you trust in the arm of flesh known as your own mind and rational faculties? Or will you trust in the arm of flesh that thought the all-knowing, all-loving God of the universe really wanted us to murder homosexuals or commit genocide in order to grab a piece of land that belonged to someone else? But that's not all. I also noticed something even more important and telling about my fellow believers. They preferred evidence too. And when they had it, or even when they thought they had it, they were thrilled beyond belief, pun intended, and anxious to throw it in the face of skeptics. Religious moderates, like the atheists they oppose, also prefer evidence and reason to blind faith. At least so long as that evidence doesn't ask them to grapple with their own mortality or strip them of the comfort they get from thinking they're going to be an essential component of the best after-party ever. But when they reject the idea that homosexuals, apostates, and non-virgin girls should be murdered as instructed in Holy Writ, they are also unequivocally announcing their belief in the supremacy of reason and evidence. Religious moderates use reason to reinterpret their scripture in order to bring their beliefs in line with the evidence that we are now all privy to, that homosexuals, apostates, and non-virgin girls are not in fact worthy of death. This is one of the many sites where Christian apologists prove that they too prefer evidence, or at least a good argument, that is reason, over simply believing and having faith. But sadly, sites like this exist for people who, if they are wrong, they don't want to know. That's what apologetics is all about. It's an organized way to keep your head fully buried in the sand. My old buddy and Judeo-Christian apologist Dennis Prager has said publicly that if he thought there was no God to make everything right in the end, he wouldn't be able to get out of bed in the morning. That is a person who, if he's wrong about God, clearly doesn't want to know. People like Mr. Prager cannot allow themselves to look at opposing evidence objectively. There's too much at stake, and their desires are more important than what's real and true. However limiting and lacking in courage such statements may be, I completely understand. When I left religion and my belief in God at the time, the source of my life's meaning and sense of purpose, I spent about 2 years battling a severe case of existential angst. A part of me desperately wished I could put that genie back in the bottle. Since the scientific revolution, since Tertullian really, no believer has been proud to say, as Tertullian offered, "I believe because it is absurd." But isn't that what faith really requires? If you've got a magical being who can do the impossible, why should things have to make sense? And now you understand the fundamentalist mind and the danger faith poses to every person on this planet. You see, fundamentalists don't care that pushing homosexuals off tall buildings seems immoral or cruel or irrational. They don't care any more than Christians cared when they tortured or burned women at the stake for being witches. Reason and the morality of reasonable people holds no sway for the fundamentalist because they don't worship a reasonable God. They worship a being from beyond the realm of reason, where anything is possible. And what he says goes. That includes, but is not limited to, the following: genocide, infanticide, murder, rape, sexism, racism, eternal torture, and the occasional mauling of young children via she-bear. There is no analog for this amongst atheists and anti-theists. It's why Christians in Sweden or Denmark don't have to worry about being hacked to death in the streets with a machete for blogging about their Christianity. It's why Muslims in Britain or America or Canada don't have to fear a pogrom after the atheist convention wraps up in their town. People who really do want to know if they're wrong aren't arrogant enough to believe that their way is the only way, and because of that, we don't have the urge that fundamentalists do to snuff out the opposition. In fact, we welcome other points of view and are happy for the challenge. I guess in theory, I could become a fundamentalist about evidence and reason, but my commitment to evidence and reason requires that I abandon evidence and reason if someone can demonstrate a more reliable method for the acquisition of truth. If 3 Christians can get together tomorrow and end world hunger simply by asking Jesus, I'll convert and begin a meaningful request list of my own with my new BFF. Say goodnight, Pat. If Jews can put a man on the moon using nothing but faith, I'll begin a new life filled with a vastly larger number of days I don't work. And if Muslims can cure cancer with prayer, I'll be bowing down towards Mecca 10 times a day. 5, please. That's for doubters and slackers. But until that day, well, I'm going to do everything I can to keep my wits about me. And I hope you'll do the same. But I know that if you are a fundamentalist, that option isn't within the realm of possibility.